Hi, my name is Charles Critchell and I'm the founding director of Fair City, a London-based city transport think tank and social enterprise. In the run-up to the London 2021 mayoral elections, I'll be interviewing candidates on the transport, urban and environmental issues which matter to Londoners. However, unlike the traditional interviews held in the back of a black cab, I'll be inviting candidates to join me in the front of a cargo bike, courtesy of cargo bike logistics company Pedal Me. Our third candidate is Shaun Bailey. Shaun is a former youth worker, a former government special advisor, a current London Assembly member and the Conservatives mayoral candidate. And riding for us today is Ben Knowles, the CEO and co-founder of Pedal Me. So guys, should we go?
Ready to go.
So hi Shaun, a lot's happened since the elections were postponed a year ago. If we firstly look at short-term changes, what do you consider to be the single largest transport change that Londoners have faced this last year?
The biggest transport change that London's faced, of course, has been the state of TfL. TfL's finances have fallen apart. I'd argue that position's been coming for more than a year. But yes, TfL's finances, because that has a broad impact on LTNs, on the tube network. Do we have the ability to clean the buses? That's been the biggest transport issue over the last year.
Okay, thanks. So you currently sit on both the London Assembly's Transport and Environment Committees, giving you a unique insight into issues in these areas. Perhaps you could explain how these committees work with the Mayor and what you consider to be the key longer-term transport and environmental issues facing Londoners.
So these committees, Transport and Environment, obviously they question the Mayor about his plans, and we look to see if the policies he's implemented have had any impact. Transport has a lot of detail because the budget is huge, and the environment, I think, is a big opportunity for us. It's one of the newer issues that London has to deal with. I would say that in the past year, there's been very little detail coming from the Mayor about what we need to do on the Transport Committee. We've of course questioned him about Crossrail because that's been a calamity that's cost Londoners £5.1 billion. And that has a knock-on effect to other things that we want to achieve on the Transport Committee. And I think it's important that Londoners understand that transport and environment are intimately tied up because that's the biggest emitter, our transport system. And also as well, it's our biggest opportunity. If we can get transport right in London, it helps us economically, socially and environmentally all in one fell swoop. And that's why my plan is always looking at implementation rather than saying sweet words. I want to deliver actual impact.
Okay, no, great. So is the incoming Mayor, you become the Chair of Transport for London. In response to the pandemic, the incumbent Mayor and TfL have rolled out the London Street Space Plan, a programme which provides space for people using non-motorised modes. What are your thoughts on the Street Space Plan? And if elected Mayor, would you continue the programme?
So my thoughts on street space are this: we need the street space, and I would hope that more and more people would change modes to walking and cycling, particularly walking. If you live locally, and many people are working from home now, doing things locally means walking should be more pleasant, safer. So my plan would be to clean the environment, not just the air, but the physical built environment as well, to make walking more pleasant. And if your start point is that like mine is, then of course you keep the street space plan, but you do modify it. I think sometimes the street space plan has been thrown into an area and it hasn't been much planning, and we've either had too much street space, which has led to resentment from average road users, or has been too little, which is of course not safe when you're talking about the corona pandemic. So the plan, yes, but a much more locally driven, locally inspired plan, because I think if people are involved in the conversation of developing their own area, you get change accepted far quicker.
Okay, thanks. So an element of the Street Space Plan is the implementation of low traffic neighbourhoods, or LTNs. These are essentially residential neighbourhoods in which side streets have been closed to through traffic, but still permit access for visitors and residents. You're heading a petition called Stop Cairns Traffic Chaos, which campaigns for a temporary ban on LTNs. You've also publicly stated that if elected Mayor, you would hold consultations within 100 days to scrap every LTN that a majority of residents don't want. Can you explain your understanding of the current Mayor's role in introducing these schemes and the powers at your disposal to remove them, if elected mayor?
So the key issue is this: the mayor, TfL, is meant to assess these schemes and then pass the money on to do that. There's been very little assessment and even less consultation. Everybody likes the idea of a low traffic neighbourhood in their area. Who wouldn't? But of course, residents are the ones who have to deal with these things. And there's two elements here that the mayor has entirely missed. One, are the residents being looked at so the scheme is developed in a useful way? And two, do the residents want a scheme at all? Because in many schemes, it's actually led to a far reduced air quality because there's much more traffic on the local road. In other schemes, they've been entirely dangerous because emergency vehicles, carer vehicles can't get through. I mean, there's a scheme on the A12 where you turn off and there's a planter directly in front of you, and then there's videos of people backing out onto the A12 because they have no alternative. This is a poor plan. The residents pointed it out in the first place, so they should have been listened to, just on safety grounds, if nothing else. I could take you to Ealing, where that scheme has been entirely unsuccessful. Are LTNs the villain? No. Poor planning is the villain. And that's why, as mayor, I would do much more around the planning of delivering LTN.
Okay, great. So we're just about to join Cycle Superhighway number 3, a segregated cycle lane. Segregated cycle lanes are important because they provide all types of Londoners with an option for travelling safely. This is significant because transport planning has traditionally been biased in favour of men over the needs of others. If elected mayor, what steps would you take to promote a more inclusive and safer transport network which caters for groups which are currently marginalised?
One of the failings of the segregated cycle scheme is that it doesn't introduce new cyclists. Only 14% of BAME people have any connection to cycling at all. And the number is almost as low for women as well. So I want to see a cycle scheme that allows less confident cyclists the ability to get used to cycling, to do it in a quiet area. We absolutely let go of the quiet ways, which I thought was a shame, because that's how most young people, by young I mean children, get introduced to cycling. It was a way that women and people from ethnic minorities, such as me, would learn to cycle and how gain that confidence. So I think we need to go back to that. And the whole conversation about cycling, actually, I think has become too adversarial. It's you're either pro-cycling or you're not. I don't think that's correct. I think we can all be pro-cycling if the conversation is had with a little more balance. And I think that's the way I would approach it, much more balanced. Talking about road use in general. Many cyclists drive, walk and cycle. Let's use that connection to all three modes to be a bit more generous in the way we talk about providing the funding and the space for cyclists.
Okay, thanks. That's really interesting. Now, I think Ben has got a question for you on the Silvertown Tunnel.
So, Shaun, I've really enjoyed our ride so far. I've just got a couple of questions for you. The first one is about Silvertown Tunnel. So for us, as a cyclo-logistics company, we can't use the Blackwall Tunnel at the minute. And what that means is that there are preferential routes for motors that we can't access. So while we outcompete motors across the whole city, there's one bit of London where we can't compete because we don't have access to that route and motor vehicles do. And what that means is that people don't just not use us for the trips that go through there, but then that means they use motors for most of their logistics needs instead of using us. And Silvertown Tunnel is going to accentuate that. So what's your view on Silvertown Tunnel, and what are you going to do to help us as a company to help remove motor trips from that area of London?
So the Silvertown Tunnel you need to look at it in the context of whole of London. There are several crossings across the Thames. The vast majority of them are in the west. The only crossings in the east are all tolled. And it means that people don't use the tolled crossings, and of course, apart from the Rotherhithe, but people don't use the tolled crossings. So we're getting a huge build-up of traffic around there. And we need to alleviate that traffic for health reasons and for economic reasons as well. So I think the Silvertown Tunnel, it's a done deal. It will happen, and it will have a benefit to traffic in London, to movement in London, particularly in the east of London. I'm an East Londoner, and the traffic, because of our lack of crossings, is life-threatening, I believe, so we need to do that. to help you as a company, I think is simple. There's two things. First and foremost, we trumpet the effect you've had. All companies exist on their ability to trade economically well. You made the point, you are more efficient than cars. This isn't about car versus bike, it's about the fact that you are a better way of doing things. And if people can see that, have it told to them and mandated, then they'll accept that. They'll grab it because it's the right thing to do. That's why if I'm in the City Hall, if anybody comes to me with a greener way of doing anything from, I don't know, printing to delivering goods, I'll get all over that, because I think you have to demonstrate the commercial value of green approaches, not just the moral approach, not just the moral value. The commercial value is clearly valuable, and we need to talk about that a bit more as well.
So the question there was, there's a bit of infrastructure there that's preventing us from competing and doing what we can do across the rest of London. So what is it that you're going to do to help us compete in that bit of London?
So you're saying the Silvertown Tunnel prevents you from competing?
It creates an advantage for motor vehicles because it's a route that we don't have access to.
Or you could look at it another way. It alleviates a massive air quality problem. It alleviates a movement problem in the east of London as well. That's why I said you have to look at these things in the context of it all. If you're an East Londoner, like millions and millions of us are, the Silvertown Tunnels is a relief. I used to live in Greenwich. The traffic from the Rotherhithe Tunnel, should there be an accident near or something like that, meant that you could do nothing. So I don't see the Silvertown Tunnel as giving someone else an advantage. I see the Silvertown Tunnel as alleviating a pressure point that we have in London.
Okay, so Shaun, an issue you touched upon there, and a serious one which disproportionately impacts younger people and London's most deprived communities, is air quality. As you're aware, the London Assembly's Environment Committee published a report in February 2021 titled Clearing the Air, Pollution in London. The report considers that nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, along with particulate matter, PM2.5, are the two main pollutants affecting air quality in London. It praises the current mayor's ultra-low emission zone, the ULEZ, as being the biggest single contributor to a reduction in NO2 concentrations. The ULEZ is due to be expanded to the north and south circulars later this year, but you have pledged to stop this. Can you explain why you wouldn't extend the ULEZ and what you would do to improve air quality in London?
Great question. So just two things I'd say. Firstly, the biggest contribution to the clean-up of air in London has actually been people changing their vehicles at quite a rapid rate. And a lot of that has been pushed by the government and mandating that ICE-engined cars will no longer be legal to be sold in 30 years' time, 2035. The reason I will not expand the ultra-low emission zone is threefold. Firstly, it is not the best way to produce clean air in London. What it is doing is taxing people to pollute, and what you see is people will just pay the tax and will continue to get the pollution, particularly in a zone that is so enormous. And what happens is when you cross into that enormous zone, you will then try to get your money's worth and do more miles. So actually it becomes a perverse incentive to do more and more miles. That's one thing. The second thing, vast areas of that new expanded zone don't have an air quality problem. So you're now forcing poorer people in those areas to pay for richer people to drive around and pollute. I don't think that's right. And the third thing is, if you actually want to clean the air, don't attack people's wallets, attack the source. So when I say I'll clean the air, I will make sure the entire bus fleet by 2025 is only bought is zero emission buses. Why? Because that's the equivalent of taking 1.1 million cars from the roads. I'll also give a £6,000 interest-free loan to back cab drivers so they speed up the adoption of their new cab, which is again the equivalent of taking another million cars off the road. This is how you clean the air in London. On top of that, I'm a big fan of car clubs because I want to reduce car ownership in London. Because for every one car in a car club, it takes 13 private cars off the road. These are the kind of measures we should be after. Things that are impactful, that actually do something. I'm excited to help Londoners move away from car ownership, but we have to give them a decent alternative as well. That's why you've heard me focus on TfL's finances. Sadiq Khan has destroyed TfL's finances, and that's important because it affects our public transport. So I will be starting an infrastructure bank that will be £10.9 billion large to finance TfL's development into the future. These are the things that make London a cleaner, greener place to live.
So, some interesting points there. The UK has set a target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 to end its contribution to global warming. The role of transport is vital in achieving this, as the sector is the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions in the UK. The government's March 2020 Decarbonising Transport reports states that an important aspect of reducing emissions from transport will be to use our cars less. Here in London, the majority of boroughs have passed climate emergency declarations, which aim to achieve net zero targets using measures such as halving petrol and diesel journeys. If elected mayor, how would you work with the boroughs to reach net zero targets? And would reducing car dependency feature in your plans?
Absolutely, reducing car dependencies features in my plans. That's why you hear me talk about car clubs. It's why you hear me talk about modal change. It's why you hear me talk about working locally to reduce that. It's why you hear me talking about the finances of TfL, because TfL is our way to reduce car dependency in London. That's the first thing. The second piece is to work with local authorities. I think there's two steps. First, let's speak to authorities who don't have a climate action plan, ask why, and provide the expertise and the support in City Hall to make that happen, and to work collectively. Because yes, transport emissions are a big thing, but so is heating. Retrofit is going to be a massive task for London. So let's start to have a plan about that as well. And I think that needs all of London to look at it in concert with the local authorities as well.
Okay, good points. And so you've made prioritising outer London a big part of your campaign. Two of your transport pledges include firstly scrapping a yet unconfirmed boundary charge for drivers travelling into London, and secondly introducing 30 minutes free parking on outer London high streets. These measures appear to be at odds with central government's own policy position, as its Decarbonising Transport report additionally states that it wants to make public transport and active travel the natural first choice for daily activities. Can you tell us who will benefit from your policies and how, and whether London, as the UK capital, should be at the forefront of promoting more sustainable modes of transport?
So who will benefit from these policies is all of London. If we make London an island, we lose because it raises living costs for everybody in London. People travel across that border regularly to service London. Anything from police officers to plumbers and electricians, etc. And any cost they have will be passed on to Londoners. And as we are recovering from the pandemic, we need to make sure that our economic situation is the best it can be. That's why that won't happen. And when you look at outer London, that's one of the biggest failures of Sadiq Khan. He hasn't understood the difference in travel patterns, travel modes between outer London and inner London. I happen to live in outer London, but I've also lived in Zone 2. So I understand the difference. The distances we travel in outer London and the poor public transport we have because of TfL's finances means that driving, unfortunately, is more relevant. People don't drive because they like it. People drive because there is no alternative. So when I talk about fixing TfL's finances, that is why I want to do that. So when the mayor brings in a border tax, which, by the way, he has not ruled out, it means that people in outer London start to feel like they're not being addressed. And it makes them feel like, well, if all we're going to be done is tax, no one's going to provide us extra transport links, then we will continue to drive. What I'm trying to say to people is, let's look at how we live locally, let's look at where and when we drive, and let's look at how we replace that. But the first step is repairing TfL's finances.
Okay, thanks. So just going to go back to something you touched upon earlier. So the ability to work constructively with central government to both fund and deliver big infrastructure projects is important in maintaining and growing the capital's transport network. If elected mayor, you have pledged to create an infrastructure bank. Can you tell us exactly what this is and how it would work?
So the infrastructure bank I'm proposing comes from the model that the KfW bank used to rebuild the German economy after the Second World War. So it's a very tried and tested model. In fact, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has copied us and he's going to do a national infrastructure bank. So basically, we will take money from mayoral SIL and business rates rebate, put it together and leverage it 10 times in the capital markets, and then spend that money on the infrastructure of London. The lion's share of that money, the vast majority of that money would actually go to TfL. It's our biggest single cost. And again, I want to give people decent public transport so they don't feel the need to own a car because transport is so good. So anything from my plan to rebuild Hammersmith Bridge. So immediately I'd be able to make the crossing free. Currently, it's going to be charged. I would make it free. Secondly, I'd be able to put in a temporary bridge to make sure that at least cyclists, emergency vehicles and pedestrians could get across the bridge. And thirdly, we then have the monies for the mayor to pay his part in providing funds to replace the bridge. Repair the bridge, replace the bridge, whichever is more relevant. But that's the point, isn't it? It's an infrastructure bank that works for London. And why this is important, it rebuilds the trust between London and the government. Currently, Sadiq Khan has just gone to the government and asked for £29 billion for all manner of things instead of leveraging the assets we have in London. That says to the government that I, as Mayor of London, am serious. You need to meet me halfway because I'm raising as much money as I can so you can give me more, rather than just saying pay, because any responsible government has to look at where it's spending its money. I will make sure every penny they give us is doubled, is tripled.
Okay, no, that's good. And actually, one of the things you alluded to there is that you've stated that the infrastructure bank would help to fund the repair work for Hammersmith Bridge. So this is an essential river crossing in the west of the city, which is currently closed and is causing prolonged disruption for many West Londoners. In a public broadcast in October 2020, you suggested that the Department for Transport should be fully funding the cost of the repair work. However, 6 months on and the funding still hasn't been agreed. Who do you consider to be responsible for paying for the repair work? And if elected mayor, would you have any powers to speed up the process of reopening?
So Hammersmith Council are responsible for the repairs of the bridge. They own the bridge. When I spoke to Grant Shapps, the Secretary of State for Transport, he said, I will pay money towards the bridge, because technically he doesn't have to, but he understands the impact, or at least I was able to make him understand the impact of Hammersmith Bridge being entirely closed. So he said, okay, I will stomp up money, a significant amount of money, but the council have to tell me how much they're going to pay so we can have a negotiation. I can meet them. The council have refused to do that. So therefore, he has said, well, I cannot pay because the rules don't allow me to pay until I understand how much I need to pay. That's the first thing. That's the lay of the land. The additional piece I would bring as mayor is a better relationship, a trust relationship, to say to the government, please push the process through. You have this committee now, this task force. You need to make sure that they're more robust in delivering their goals here. I think Hammersmith Council are beginning to come to the conclusion they have to lead on the resolution, and I would encourage them to do that. I know they have a few favoured schemes they'd like to see to have the bridge completed. I would support them in that. What I'd be desperate to do is not make this a political fight. Unfortunately, because Sadiq Khan didn't just stump up the money in the beginning, and let's remember, in the beginning, he had reserves of £2.1 billion. He should have just paid for the bridge. As a matter of fact, we should be saying to councils, if you own your local bridge, which is a strategic asset for London, could you consider handing it to the mayor, handing it to TfL? Now, post the pandemic, that'll be a tougher conversation, but I would have done that in the beginning. No council can afford the bridge in that sense, I would imagine, or at least it'll be a stretch for them. We could have avoided all this if the mayor had shown some leadership.
Okay, and obviously a sort of theme of the interview has been funding, and funding is a major ongoing issue for Transport for London, to the extent that concessionary travel for over 60s and under 18s may have to be directly funded by the mayor once the current government agreement expires after the election. If elected mayor, would you keep concessionary travel, concessionary fares in place? And if so, how would you plan on funding them?
So as a London, everybody knows I come from a very poor background. My mum struggled to get me and my brother to school, give us lunch, all that kind of stuff. So I understand how important concessionary fares are. So I absolutely will be keeping over 60s travel and under 18s travel free. The way I intend to pay for it is to introduce a sponsorship scheme. A sponsorship scheme was done in Dubai. They raised £400 million, and their system is only as big as our district line. So imagine what we could raise. So I've given myself a conservative target of 500 million sponsorship across that whole network. It's been done before in London as well. We did it in the Olympics in a very limited way. I would just expand that, because that kind of money will give me more than enough to cover concessionary travel, and then I could put the money to other good things. things around disabled access. I want to do something around encouraging employers to do more for their disabled staff, and I could do some of that through TfL to make it easier to travel to work. But the point here is the mayor could have paid for this. He gave £151 million in bonus payments to TfL staff. He could afford it. He gave an extra £58 million in bonus off just the executives. He has more press officers than the Prime Minister. These are monies that he has to pay for concession travel. Instead, he decided to pass on the cost to Londoners, which I think is wrong. He could have found the money in City Hall easily.
Okay, so if we just stay with the theme of young people, and many younger Londoners are actually now navigating the city using alternative modes of transportation. This includes privately owned electric scooters, which, though illegal on the capital's roads, are still widely used. The government has recognised the potential of e-scooters in supporting a green recovery, while TfL is about to start hire scheme trials here in London. If elected mayor, do you have any plans to incorporate micromobility modes, such as e-scooters, into the city's transport network?
I think what I'd say about that is we need to see where the government go with the legality of this all. I can see the potential there. For the first and last mile, they could be really, really helpful. So I can't say I'll support something that's not legal, but the minute it becomes legal, I would do something about it. And of course, because TfL are now doing the work officially, I would support that work because, again, I'm excited about their potential to do first and last mile. But if you're listening to this and you're a young person, get a pedal bike. Cycling is the way forward. Great fun, great speed. Get a pedal bike.
Okay, excellent. And I think Ben's actually now got a question for you on the gig economy.
Yeah, so Shaun, one of the things that makes Pedal Me unique as a company is that every member of staff here is an employee, not a contractor. What that means in practice is, although we are operating bikes, and bikes are a much more efficient way of doing business, but some of our competitors, such as Uber and City Sprint and the like, they're set up with their staff as contractors, which helps them avoid quite a bit of tax. So, against the most tax avoiding of our competitors, that gives them a 35% odd tax break, essentially. What will you do to help even this out and encourage fair employment and fair work in London?
When the Uber drivers went to court and they won the case, I backed them on that. I think it was the right way to go. Any business, its greatest asset is the people in that business. You should respect them by paying them. I've had enough low-paid jobs in my time, really I have, to understand that. I think there's two things we do for a company like you. Firstly, there's a long-term thing. We take the government on and talk about the tax burden that your company or any small SME would face. Because what I want to see in London, I want us to be the SME capital of the world. And that means dealing with the tax base that all companies have to pay. And then there's a bigger, wider piece, actually, that I think is a challenge for the whole world, is what do our big multinational corporations pay in tax? They should be paying a fair rate of tax in any market that they're in. I think that's something that we need to take on morally as a world. They provide lots of employment, and that's great, and we're grateful for that, but they also should pay a fair amount of tax. And as mayor, I'd be quite happy to get involved in that conversation and lead the charge.
Excellent. So finally, Shaun, you pledge a fresh start for London, which seems apt as the city, along with the rest of the country, emerges from a year of restrictions. What's the one transport policy you're pledging that will really provide that fresh start for all Londoners?
I think the big thing is my London Infrastructure Bank, because it gives us such reach. We can support people who cycle, we can support people who walk, we can support the bus network, we can support the tube network, we can put CCTV cameras to make London safer. That, for me, is the thing that we can do. And the other thing as well is just to take responsibility for Transport for London. It is our gem. Transport for London makes London one of the world's most competitive cities, one of the best places to live. I think it's been neglected for too long. We need to put it front and centre, put it on a sure footing, and let the staff at Transport for London know we have the confidence in them.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Shaun, and good luck on the 6th of May.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Pleasure.